further, anyat, anything more, jnatavyam, knowable, avashishyate, remains to be known. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Translation. I shall now declare unto you in full this knowledge, both phenomenal and nominal, by knowing which there shall remain nothing further to be known. Translation with repetition. I shall now declare unto you in full this knowledge, both phenomenal and nominal, by knowing which there shall remain nothing further to be known. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Complete knowledge includes knowledge of the phenomenal world and the spirit behind it. The source of both of them is transcendental knowledge. The Lord wants to explain the above-mentioned system of knowledge because Arjuna is Krishna's confidential devotee and friend. In the beginning of the 4th chapter, this explanation was given by the Lord, and it is again confirmed here. Complete knowledge can be achieved only by the devotee of the Lord, directly from the Lord in reciprocal succession. Therefore, one should be intelligent enough to know the source of all knowledge, who is the cause of all causes, and the only subject for meditation in all types of yoga practices. When the cause of all causes becomes known, then everything knowable becomes known, and nothing remains unknown. The Vedas say, Yasmin Vignate Sarvam Eva Vignatam Bhavanti. Thus ends the Transcendental Bhaktivedanta Purport. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Nitnamine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashyata Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So we are discussing the second verse from chapter 7. The chapter 7 is also known as the knowledge of the absolute. And yesterday we discussed about the first verse from the 7th chapter, where it began saying Shri Bhagavan Uvacha. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha, referring to the Supreme Lord, said. So the Sri Bhagavan Uvacha means the Supreme Lord said. Who is the Supreme Lord? Bhagavan Shri Krishna. The Lord Shri Krishna is speaking in these verses. And he's speaking these verses to Arjuna. And the first verse said, Maya Sakta Manaparda Yogam Yunjan Madashreha Asamshayam Samagram Mam Yatha Gnashashi Tashrino. So in the first verse, the Lord is instructing Arjuna to hear. Tachrinu. By hearing, he can acquire this knowledge. So there is certain emphasis that is being given here about the importance of hearing as a source of knowledge. We will discuss a little more as why this hearing is so important to acquire knowledge. And what happens by hearing? Lord Krishna is saying here that asamshayam samagram mam. Only by hearing one can obtain to this knowledge. What knowledge? Complete knowledge of the absolute truth. So asamshayam samagram. So one can know the supreme absolute truth in fullness, in completeness, and free from doubt. So normal knowledge that we acquire in this world is usually incomplete. It's not always complete. And therefore, we see that the scientific advancement that we see year after year, they add certain more amount of knowledge to the existing knowledge because it is not complete. If some knowledge is complete, there is no need of addition. But in the usual world, we need to add something more. And another important point to note is that no knowledge is free from doubt. So therefore, we always doubt and we bring up another theory to understand whether will this theory perform better? Would that explain better? And so on and so forth. But however, Lord Krishna is stating here that by hearing, one will know this knowledge incomplete, the knowledge of the absolute, the knowledge about him, incomplete and free from doubt. Now, moving on from this statement, now Lord Krishna is explaining what is that can be known in full and how is that, what is that knowledge? Lord Krishna is explaining in the verses starting today, the different kinds of knowledges and then what those different categories of knowledges are in the following verses. So in this verse, it says, Jnanam teham sa vijnanam idam vakshyami asheshataha. So Lord Krishna is again instructing here to Arjuna, aham vakshyami asheshataha. So I shall explain unto you this knowledge in full, idam, this knowledge in full. So what knowledge is that? Prabhupada is interestingly translating these two words, jnanam and sa vijnanam, very carefully. The word jnanam is usually referred to as knowledge in many of the places. The word jnanam appears in many places in Bhagavad Gita, Shraddhava Labhate Jnanam, and many other places. And in each place, usually, in most cases, the word jnanam is translated as knowledge. But here, in this case, Prabhupada is very carefully choosing the word in translating jnanam as phenomenal knowledge. And also it is important to note that Prabhupada is translating the word vijnanam as nominal knowledge. So it is also important to note that Srila Prabhupada is very expertly using the philosophical terms, the Western philosophical terms, which are used so as to explain certain intricate concepts. And Prabhupada's disciples, in fact, Harikesh Prabhu, in Prabhupada Memories, he mentions that sometimes Prabhupada, when dictating the verses and the translation to the word-to-word meaning and the purpose, Prabhupada would pause for a certain time. And the pause is to make sure that Prabhupada is choosing the most accurate word that can describe the word in this context. And we can very clearly see this is the only place where Prabhupada is using this word phenomenal knowledge for jnanam and nominal knowledge for jnanam, for vijnanam. So let us pay a little attention to what these two words mean before we further understand the verse. The word phenomenal knowledge refers to knowledge which is obtained as what appears to us. By this, what it means is that we perceive the world through our senses and process through our mind and intelligence to make sense of what the world is. And usually, the way the world appears to us is not the way it is most of the time. And so our senses can perceive the reality in a certain way. And that appearance of what the world is out there through our senses is known as phenomenal knowledge. Just to give you an example, for example, if someone were to walk in a desert, one may see a form of water body that is visible. Now, when one goes closer to it, it could be possible that it's truly a water body, or it could be also a mirage. Now, this appearance of what it looks like is the phenomena or the phenomenal knowledge. But what it is actually could be very different from what it appears to us. And therefore, in fact, all the knowledge can be categorized into these two categories called phenomenal and nominal. And this was actually introduced or made popular in the Western philosophy by Immanuel Kant. So he's a German philosopher, and he proposed this distinction to state that there is something known as transcendental idealism. That means there is something beyond what we can perceive, what we can see. There is a reality, but that is never perceivable to us because our senses are defective. So although in Western philosophy, there is a certain understanding that there lies something beyond our senses. There is some reality, the real essence. In fact, Aristotle also says that there is something known as essence behind what we see. Although there are various Western philosophers who state that there is something that is existing beyond what we see, but what that is was not very clear. And therefore, in order to represent all that kind of knowledge, which is beyond our direct perception, is known as nominal. That's how the Immanuel Kant distinguishes. And most of the Western philosophers, they think that this aspect of knowledge, which is beyond our perception of senses, is never possible to be attained. And therefore, there is some sort of speculation that is done to identify what lies beyond our perception, or sometimes it is completely denied, or it is relegated to stating that it is not an important question to answer. However, it is important to note that the Bhagavad Gita provides both of these knowledges, both phenomenal and nominal. Nominal means what lies beyond our direct perception. A simple example to understand is that when we see a person, one can clearly see that one has got different bodily parts, eyes, nose, head, legs, hand, and different bodily parts. But it is very difficult for us to perceive directly that he has got a brain, he has got intelligence, he has got false ego, he has got a soul. So now, these aspects of knowledge which are not directly perceivable for us, we may indirectly perceive to some extent, maybe the mind and maybe the intelligence. But anything finer than that is very difficult for anyone to perceive by one's own sensual perceptions. Therefore, it is required that unless we do not hear from an authoritative source about the knowledge that lies beyond our perception, one cannot acquire complete knowledge. And here, starting this verse, Lord Krishna is explaining that I'm not only going to explain the phenomenal knowledge. The whole world is filled with different kinds of descriptions of phenomenal knowledge. But it is very, very difficult, in fact, impossible for any mundane person with 4 kinds of defects or imperfections to acquire this nominal knowledge. But this knowledge is possible only when someone who is perfect in knowledge, the Supreme Lord, when he reveals this knowledge, when he provides this knowledge, one can understand this knowledge. In fact, in my thesis, which I recently submitted on science and Gaudiya Vaishnavism, I actually talk about this point, that there is something known as ontological truths, or truths about objects which the way they exist and what they are. By scientific methods, which primarily rely on phenomenal method, cannot describe what the ontological truths about what really exists there. Now, in order to understand what truly exists and what is the nature of the things in the true totality, one needs method beyond the empirical ways of finding knowledge. And it is here that one needs to take shelter of a superior source of knowledge, which is beyond common perception, beyond one's own senses. And that knowledge is being provided here by Lord Krishna. And Lord Krishna is stating that by knowing this, yaj gnatva neha bhuyo anyaj. So in this world, in this world, there is nothing to be known. By knowing this knowledge of what is nominal and phenomenal, there shall remain nothing further to be known. Gnatavyam avashishyate. So this knowledge, these 2 categories of knowledge, to understand very clearly, categorically, can provide one with the complete knowledge. And that is what this verse is saying. And as we will see in the verses coming forward, where Lord Krishna provides the different kinds of phenomenal knowledge, and knowledge which is superior to that, the nominal knowledge of the Spirit and the Lord himself. So with that as the background, let us look at some of the aspects given the purport. Complete knowledge includes knowledge of the phenomenal world and the spirit behind it. So as we see, Prabhupada says that a Vaishnava, a devotee of the Lord, is not supposed to be just a sentimentalist. He is also can provide the knowledge of both phenomenal and the spirit behind it. And it is very important to understand, for example, even if you look at our own body, if you just understand the functioning of just the matter or the bodily parts, is not sufficient. We also need to understand what lies beyond the body, which is moving this body. What is the spirit? What is that energy, the spiritual energy, which is giving rise to consciousness and making this body function? Srila Prabhupada similarly states that this whole gigantic cosmic manifestation is also like a body, which has a spirit, a spiritual force behind which it is running, because of which it is running. And Prabhupada says, not knowing that and just understanding the material cosmic manifestation does not constitute complete knowledge. Therefore, if we were to understand the knowledge in its true understanding, then we need to know what lies in front of our eyes and what lies beyond our senses. And Prabhupada, in this purport, states that who can understand this knowledge? Now, if there are two categories of knowledge, what is that is required for one to acquire this knowledge? The knowledge which is beyond one's direct senses. And Prabhupada is citing here the verse from 4th chapter, although not directly citing, but Prabhupada is stating that in the beginning of the 4th chapter, this explanation was given by the Lord. And it is again confirmed here. Complete knowledge can be achieved only by the devotee of the Lord, directly from the Lord in disciplic succession. So this is a very, very important point, that why, despite a lot of philosophy that is being done in the Western world, why this aspect of nominal knowledge is not understandable, or why it is still absent. It is being said here that it can be only achieved by the devotee of the Lord. And we'll also discuss a little more about what is complete knowledge Prabhupada mentions elsewhere, and what this qualification of one to attain this complete knowledge. So as we see in the 4th chapter, beginning with where Lord says that this imperceptible science of yoga was instructed by me to the sun god Vivaswan, and Vivaswan instructed it to Manu, and the father of mankind, Manu, the father of mankind, and Manu in turn instructed it to Ikshvaku. So you can see that this knowledge is coming in disciplic succession. So the form of knowledge, that is nominal knowledge, transcendental knowledge, it comes down only in the disciplic succession. So either one can receive this knowledge from the Supreme Lord himself, as in the case of sun god Vivaswan, or it has to come down in a bona fide sampradaya, in a bona fide disciplic succession, where the pure devotee of the Lord, as he heard this knowledge from another pure devotee of the Lord, can pass on this knowledge to others. And further it is said that in due course of time, this knowledge was broken. Although this knowledge was received in this chain of disciplic succession, and the saintly kings could understand this knowledge, evam parampara praptam imam rajarsho vidu sakalena mahaka yogo nasta parantapa. So this knowledge has to be received. It is not that one can go out and search and find out. This knowledge is only available when one can hear this from a superior source. So in this parampara system, this knowledge is passed down. Now, however, in due course of time, this knowledge was lost. And then Lord Krishna explains that why he is giving this knowledge to Arjuna. And he says, Bhaktosi me sakha cheti rahasyam hi etad uttamam. Because you're my dear friend and devotee, that I'm revealing this knowledge. I am giving you understanding this transcendental mystery, rahasyam, of this great science. So this knowledge, which is Prabhupada also explains, complete knowledge means to understand the Supreme Lord, the absolute truth in totality. So only when one can understand the Supreme Lord and one's relationship with the Supreme Lord and how to act in that relationship constitutes true knowledge. And that knowledge can be obtained only when the creator, the controller, the supreme controller agrees to reveal that knowledge. If Prabhupada gives a wonderful example, he says that even if you want to get knowledge in a school, if you just go to school and do not follow the rules and regulations in the school, they will not keep you in the school and provide you with the knowledge. They will ask you to leave the school. Similarly, Prabhupada says that if one wants to receive this knowledge, there are certain rules and regulations. And what are those rules and regulations? One should become a devotee of the Lord. Bhaktosi me sakha cheti. Unless one does not surrender to the Supreme Lord, unless one does not become a devotee of the Lord, this knowledge is not possible to be obtained. And it is also very important to note that Srila Prabhupada is stating that this knowledge is obtained in disciplic succession, only by the devotee of the Lord, directly from the Lord in disciplic succession. Now, this is another important point. Now, just to illustrate this important point, one can take the example when Srila Prabhupada came to the United States. There was a lady who asked, Prabhupada, can you recommend, Swamiji, can you recommend me a Bhagavad Gita which I can read? And when Prabhupada thought for a moment, at that time, Prabhupada has not yet translated the Bhagavad Gita as it is. And therefore, they were using another edition of Bhagavad Gita as a reference to discuss. Then Prabhupada thought for a few minutes and he said, no, I don't think I can recommend you any bona fide English edition of Bhagavad Gita. And although there are so many great Sanskrit scholars, there are so many expert people who write on various aspects of Bhagavad Gita, but because they don't come in disciplic succession, they do not provide the complete knowledge, the complete understanding which Lord Krishna is providing in Bhagavad Gita. And the most essential aspect of complete knowledge, Prabhupada says elsewhere, is that Sarva Dharman Parityajya Mam Ekam Sharanam Vraja. Prabhupada says that is the complete knowledge, to surrender to the Supreme Lord and to become his devotee. So unless one does not get that knowledge, if one does not become a devotee of the Lord after reading Bhagavad Gita, it is incomplete knowledge. And that knowledge was not provided by so many so-called scholars. And another important point to note is that when Srila Prabhupada came, when he, coming in the pure Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya, when he introduced the knowledge of Bhagavad Gita, we can see how thousands and millions of people have become devotees of Lord Krishna. So this is the effect. So when the knowledge is coming down in the right disciple succession, then the knowledge becomes complete. Only then one can receive or achieve or find complete knowledge as being given by the Supreme Lord. And it is also our great fortune that not only we have this knowledge of Bhagavad Gita as what Lord Krishna spoke to Arjuna, but we also have the translation and purport given by a pure devotee. And therefore, we have the knowledge of the Supreme Lord as provided as explained by a pure devotee. And therefore, we can also achieve or receive this complete knowledge if we follow the rules and regulations. And Prabhupada says that is what sadhana bhakti is, the Vidhi bhakti is. So when we follow this process as given by the spiritual master, one becomes qualified to achieve and receive this complete knowledge. And therefore, Prabhupada says that Arjuna was given this knowledge because of his qualifications. And Prabhupada is again emphasizing that aspect here, that not whimsically one can acquire this knowledge. It has to be revealed by the Supreme Lord. It has to be given in the Parampara system, without which this knowledge is not at all obtainable. Then Prabhupada also mentions that therefore one should be intelligent enough to know the source of all knowledge, who is the cause of all causes and the only object for meditation in all types of yoga practices. So this understanding, as we will see in the future verses also, so sometimes people may wonder how knowledge of Bhagavad Gita can be complete, or why there is so much knowledge that is present out in the world. And there are so many people who are generating lots of information every day. Then how can we say that the knowledge present in Bhagavad Gita or the scriptures is complete or sufficient? So in order to understand this, there's beautiful description in the Chatushloki Bhagavatam although I'll not go there today, but how by understanding the essence, by understanding the Supreme Lord as the source of all sources, the cause of all causes, and how by understanding the different energies of the Lord, because unless, so Prabhupada gives another example to understand this. So Prabhupada says that if you see fire, there is always heat and light associated with fire. And similarly, if you see sunlight in your room, although you're inside the room, but through the window you see sunlight. And as soon as you see the sunlight, you see that there is this as the energy of the sun. Although you do not see sun directly, you can perceive that to be an energy of the sun. Similarly, Prabhupada says that this entire cosmic manifestation is nothing but an energy of the Supreme Lord. And just like Prabhupada further goes to explain that even if you look any place in this earth, it is always controlled by someone or the other. You may not know that the government laws are controlling this, but it's actually controlling. And Prabhupada says, if you do not follow the rules, immediately the police will come and catch you. If you understand the rules and follow, then you are safe. If not, you are under the influence of the police. Prabhupada is saying that there is a supreme controller. Sometimes you may not know the supreme controller, but you may know him through the law books, or you may know him through his energies. So similarly, one may not be always perceiving the Lord, but through his energies, one can also sense or understand that there lies a supreme truth, supreme controller behind all this manifestation. And therefore, Prabhupada says, therefore, one should be intelligent enough to know the source of all knowledge. So there is a source of all knowledge. So as we see in the prayers of Brahma, we only have Brahma Samhita 1 chapter, which is obtained by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in his South India tour. So the first verse itself says, Ishvaraha Paramaha Krishnaha Sachidananda Vigraha Anadiradir Govinda Sarva Karana Karana. So the Supreme Lord is the cause of all causes, and he is all spiritual, Sat Chit and Ananda. So he's full of knowledge. He's the source of all knowledge. So if one can understand and the source of all knowledge, and as we see also in Bhagavad Gita, Tesam Satata Yuktanam Bhajatam Priti Purvakam Kadami Buddhi Yogam Tam. So as soon as we engage in the service of the Lord, as soon as we establish our relationship with the Supreme Lord, who is the source of all knowledge, then he who is present as Paramatma, and he reveals us all the knowledge. And as we were also saying in today's morning verse, Athapi Deva Padam Bhuja Dvai Prasada Leshanu Grahita. So we were seeing how by the mercy of the Lord, only one can know the Bhagavad Tattva Vijnanam. The science of the Supreme Lord can be only understood by the mercy of the Lord. If the Lord does not bestow his mercy, one cannot understand the Supreme Lord. And therefore, unless one becomes a devotee, so as we will also see in the future verses, Naham Prakasha Sarvasya. So the Lord is not visible because the curtain of Yogamaya is covering. So if we want to really understand the complete knowledge, the supreme absolute truth, then there is no other way apart from keeping the Supreme Lord as the center of, as the object of meditation in all yoga practices. Unless we do not become a devotee, the science of the Supreme Lord is not understood. And Prabhupada explains further in this purport by stating that when the cause of all causes becomes known, then everything knowable becomes known and nothing remains unknown. So here again, we can see that Prabhupada is quoting a verse from Mundaka Upanishad. So as we can see here, whenever something has to be established very firmly, usually one refers to Shruti. Shruti means the Vedic literatures, the Upanishads. So one tries to quote from a Shruti text so as to emphasize the point or to strengthen the argument that is being made. And here, Prabhupada is, in order to strengthen this point, that if one knows the Supreme Lord, then everything that is to be known becomes known. Prabhupada is quoting this verse, Yasmin Vijnate Sarvam Eva Vijnatam Bhavanti. So if one knows the Supreme Lord, as we were also saying yesterday, that there are 5 fundamental truths which Bhagavad Gita is talking about. Ishvara, the living entities, Jiva, Karma, the activities, Kala, and Prakriti. Now, of all of them, if one understands the Supreme Lord, the Supreme Absolute Truth, then all his different energies, the internal energy, the external energy, and the marginal energy, all becomes easily understandable. And Prabhupada also states that if one understands the Supreme Lord, then all the different aspects of the Absolute. Now, it is also important to note this word knowledge of the Absolute is the chapter's title. And in philosophy, the word Absolute refers to the supermost being. And so this chapter is talking about the nature, knowledge of the supermost being. And that is none other than Krishna. As we will also see in very few verses, we will see how Krishna reaffirms and reconfirms that what is his position. He is the ultimate truth. And therefore, if one understands the Bhagavan feature, Prabhupada says, all other aspects of the Absolute, that is the Brahman and Paramatma, they also become revealed to the individual. And so are the different energies, the different ways the manifestation, the cosmic manifestation functions, all that when one understands the Supreme Lord, all other knowledges are part of that. And it becomes very clear. And the example is that of Brahmaji. The Lord, when Brahma meditates, when he does not know how to create, and when Lord explains the Srimad Bhagavatam in just 4 verses, and that contained all the knowledge that was required for Brahma to function. And it has got all the essence of all the knowledge of Srimad Bhagavatam. So the point here is that if one knows the essence of the essence, then everything else that is required to be known becomes knowable. In physics, there is a theory called density functional theory. This is an interesting example. So in this theory, what they do is that they take an atom and they divide that into more smaller aspects in terms of, they try to understand in terms of electrons, protons, and neutrons. And then they understand how these electrons, protons, and neutrons in a given atom interact with another atom. And they have this equation that is of Schrodinger's wave equation, which is slightly modified in this theory. And you give any kind of material that exists. Simply by this one equation, they can describe any kind of system that is possible. So if the essence of the elements, if the essence of the things, and the essence of how they function, if the most fundamental thing of that is known, then any system can be described in completeness. Although materially one is defective, one cannot do that. But when one understands the Supreme Lord, who is the essence of all essence, as we will also see in coming verses, that where Lord says that Bahunam Jarmanam Ante Gnanavan Mam Prapadyate Vasudeva Sarvamniti Sa Mahatma Sudurlabha. So by knowing that Vasudeva Sarvamniti, so that the Lord is the Supreme Lord, Krishna, is the cause of all causes. And he is Sarvamiti. After many, many births and deaths, he who is actually in knowledge surrenders unto me, knowing me to be the cause of all causes, and all that is such a great soul is very rare. So again here it is said that Prabhupada again quotes in this verse, another example from Shvetasvatara Upanishad. In this body there are powers of speaking, of seeing, of hearing, of mental activities, etc. But these are not important if not related to the Supreme Lord. And because Vasudeva is all pervading and everything is Vasudeva, the devotee surrenders in full knowledge. So similarly, as I was talking about the essence, when the essence is known, one can understand everything. So similarly, when one can understand the essence of everything is Vasudeva, the all-pervading Supreme Personality of Godhead, and when one surrenders unto him, then one understands everything that is required. And in another place, I think in 15th chapter, Prabhupada also describes knowledge as that which helps one to liberate oneself from the material bondage. So real knowledge, so there are so much knowledge that is present in the world. Prabhupada says that all knowledge is nothing but the product of three modes of material nature, which only entangle us further and further in this world. But the real knowledge is that which helps us to free us from this bondage. And that knowledge is available in Bhagavad Gita. That knowledge is obtained through the Parampara system. And when one follows the sadhana bhakti process as given by the acharyas, that is when one becomes qualified to actually receive that knowledge or achieve that knowledge in completeness. And therefore, this knowledge, although appears very not so expansive as sometimes people think that knowledge means it has to be very expansive. But no, the fundamental truths are very simple, and it can be understood the easiest when it is revealed in our heart. And to get that knowledge to be revealed, one need to develop one's relationship with the Supreme Truth, because the Supreme Truth, Supreme Person, the Supreme Lord is a person. And when he sees the sincerity in the heart of the devotee to truly render service unto him, that is when the Lord removes the curtain of Yoga Maya, the Maya Jamani Kachannam. So the deluding energy which is preventing one to see the Supreme Truth is removed when one willingly renders devotional service. So that is the way to obtain true knowledge. As we also see, one must have implicit faith in the spiritual master and the Supreme Lord's instructions. As soon as one has implicit faith and follows his instructions, then all the Vedic purports become understood. It becomes revealed to the individual. Otherwise, if one is not having implicit faith, then despite reading so many texts, reading different things, one may not acquire this knowledge. So as we also saw in the last verse, the process of understanding this knowledge. So the Shravanam, so when we hear this knowledge from the Supreme Lord, the Lord who is present in our heart, he vanquishes the Abhadra, the Vidyanoti, Surut Satam, Hridyantosto hi Abhadrani. So there are a lot of material contamination which is present in our heart, and one has to undergo this process. How does one remove this material contamination? Shravanam. So Shrunvatam Swakatha Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana. So by repeatedly hearing, as we also heard in today's morning class, when we hear the wonderful qualities of the Supreme Lord, naturally the Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema Sadhya Kabunai. So the dormant love for the Supreme Lord is evoked when we hear is naturally present in each one of us. But that will awaken only when we hear to the Supreme Lord's instructions, either in Bhagavad Gita or the various pastimes of the Lord. So as we also saw in the morning, that the Lord and anything related to the Lord is all absolute. The Lord's name, form, activities, they all are absolute. So in any ways we associate with the Lord or his pure devotees and the activities of the devotee and the Lord, that all are absolute. When we give oral reception to them, then the contaminations of the heart, how do they go? Because the Vidyanoti Sruhut Satam, because the Lord who is dwelling in everyone's heart acts as a best wishing friend and purifies the devotee who constantly engages in hearing of him. So by our own abilities, we cannot remove these contaminations. The Lord being Suhrut Satam, the very well-wishing friend, the dearmost friend of the devotees, when he sees that the devotees are really eager to hear about him, then the Lord personally removes all these impurities from the heart. And it is said that as one hears more about Krishna from Bhagavatam and from the devotees, he becomes fixed in the devotional service of the Lord. So by development of devotional service, one becomes freed from the modes of passion and ignorance, and thus material lust and avarice are diminished. So these base qualities of lust, greed, anger, enviousness, and especially the mode of passion and ignorance cannot be gone away without association of Bhagavad Gita, without hearing the glories of the Lord, without hearing, developing this taste for hearing the transcendental knowledge. One cannot get complete knowledge. One cannot develop this freedom from the base qualities. And further, it is said that when these impurities of passion and ignorance are diminished, the candidate remains steady in his position of pure goodness, becomes enlivened by devotional service, and understands the science of God perfectly. So if we want to develop steadiness in our devotional service, it is very much important that the impurities go away. And for the impurities to go, we have to constantly associate ourselves with chanting, reading, and the Navavidha Bhakti. So, and especially among them, Shravanam is the most important. Shravanam and Kirtanam. So simply by doing this, we are in contact, in association with the Supreme Lord, who is all pure. And by that, we attain to the position of pure goodness. And then when the impurities are wiped away, the candidate remains steady in his position of pure goodness, becomes enlivened by devotional service, and understands the science of God perfectly. So Prabhupada is actually explaining us what is the process that takes for us to become steady in devotional service. Not only steady, but in fact, as we saw in the previous verse, that the goal is to fix the mind on the Supreme Lord. The fixing of the mind on the Supreme Lord is not possible unless we go through this process of the science as given in these verses. So we need the mercy of pure devotee and the Supreme Lord, cleanse ourselves. Without that, it is not possible. And one man is steady and perfectly renders devotional service, and then only one can understand Bhagavad Tattva Vijnanam, that is the science of God. Thus, Bhakti Yoga severs the hard knot of material affection and enables one at once to come to the stage of Asamshayam Samagram, understanding of the supreme truth, personality of Godhead. Therefore, only by hearing from Krishna or from his devotee in Krishna consciousness can one understand the science of Krishna. So the science of absolute truth, science of Krishna, is not knowable by any other means, by speculation, by experimentation, by some kind of debates or rational, logical way of thinking. None of this will work. The only way it works is when Krishna reveals, Krishna removes the impurities from our heart, and when we engage constantly in devotional service. So this process is very important for us to remember again and again, that only by this method can we become enlivened in devotional service and understand the science of God. If not, it is not possible to understand this complete knowledge. I'll stop here and see if there are any questions or comments.
How do we know? How do we understand?
So as it is also stated in 9th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, that so usually we tend to appreciate knowledge only when we experience something. And it is said in 9th chapter, Raja Vidya Rajagohyam Pavitram Idam Uttamam Pratyaksha Avagamam Dharmyam Susakam Kartum Avyayam. So this is the characteristic that if one follows the science of understanding Krishna, as mentioned in this chapter, one is that one gets a direct perception of, one can distinguish the body and spirit, and also one can see the Supreme Lord. And one can also see that how illusory energy is actually blocking one's perception of the Supreme Lord. One can see these energies in their trueness. And therefore, one can understand one's relationship with the Lord. And as he perceives Supreme Lord and engages in the service, the first quality is Susukam Kartum Avyayam. So naturally, he becomes enlivened. Prabhupada says that everyone is trying to serve someone because they want to enliven their senses. But one can enliven one's true senses only by serving Govinda, because only he can enliven one's transcendental senses. And when the transcendental senses are enlivened, one can find true satisfaction and true happiness. So that is one of the ways one can see that one is actually engaging in the right process and doing bhakti, by which one can see Lord Govinda. When one is satisfying Lord Govinda, one's transcendental senses are also completely satisfied and one is completely happy.
Sometimes despite knowing.
So as in this case, the process is well defined. So the application of the process is the question. So usually it is also possible that in the beginning stages, devotees sometimes are more enlivened and sometimes not. So the association is very important, that devotees should always should be so one important thing for certain is that one should recognize that service means to please. If one forgets that it is an act of pleasing, then one may perform an activity on a mundane platform, but forgets that this is a service. So this idea of understanding so the goal, as it was also mentioned earlier by you, that the goal should not be forgotten. If the goal is forgotten, we perform activities without understanding why we are doing it. But when the goal is very clear as what is that I'm trying to do by all of them, and whom am I trying to please, what is the reason why I'm here, when that becomes more and more clear, and strength has to come in the association of devotees and the process, because it's possible that in the beginning stages one can go down at any point of time, but one should also seek the association of other Vaishnavas to get strength, because it is always possible someone else may be able to see a small weakness, but others may have that strength. And also as a devotee, one must be able to seek guidance from the Vaishnavas, especially from devotees who are excelling in certain aspects. One can reach out to them and perhaps seek more guidance, and at the same time offer prayers to Prabhupada and Gaurnita for further strength.
of the being as strong being.
So first important thing to notice is that, so there are two kinds of knowledge. One knowledge that what appears to us and what is actually there. So what appears to us is conditioned by our the material environment and by our body and our senses. But the true knowledge, which is independent, is not possible for us to obtain by any means. By our abilities, it is not possible to attain. The only way to attain is to attain from a higher source. Now, the higher source must be authoritative, and Prabhupada uses this word bona fide. Bona fide means it means genuine, legal, or sincere, or without deception. So the knowledge has to come from a source who is bona fide and who must be authoritative. So if we look around, anyone who has 4 defects cannot be authoritative. So one has to go beyond these 4 defects. Anyone who is beyond these 4 defects, who can provide this knowledge. And one very soon concludes that the only other source of knowledge apart from the mundane knowledge that is available is from the Shastras or from the scriptures. In any religion, the scripture is said to be a revealed word or revealed from the God. So the way to acquire this knowledge is we take that knowledge first, and just like in science, we also take a certain hypothesis or theory first, and then we implement to see whether it functions. So based upon the words, the instructions given as who that supreme truth is, who the supreme Lord is, and what the instructions he is giving, one can have initial ado shraddha and see them in the merit of what they are without being conditioned. Then very soon one will see that actually that knowledge is true when one applies them. For example, contact of senses with sense objects gives us temporary pleasure is a statement. One can pay attention to it and see, is it really true? Is it really temporary, all these things? And then one can see, yes, these are temporary things, and there is something which is beyond this. So, and then there is a certain philosophical understanding. Then also, as we see, the scriptures also give us a practical process to understand, that is the yoga process. So when one engages in the process, as we also know, when we want to go to a place which is far off, someone has to tell us that in this path, if we go this way, this way, this way, we see so and so mountains and so things, and then we're in the right direction. So similarly, the scriptures are not whimsical things, but rather they're providing us step-by-step signs as what happens if we chant, what happens if we read. And one can weigh those characteristics with the knowledge that is provided and see that one is actually in the right path, and one is also pratyaksha avagam sakshat. This knowledge is directly perceivable. So one who actually obtains this knowledge, he can clearly distinguish the true nature of things. Just to give one example, I use the word called ontology. Ontology means what really exists there. So for example, for a grocery shopkeeper, for him the concern is the vegetables, some fruits, what are there in that. For a scientist, maybe what are the electrons and what are this. But the philosophical understanding of ontology is very different. So if you go on calculating vegetables, electrons, or there can be many, many different items. But for a philosopher, the question is, what is the essence of all these material objects? They are taking different forms, but what is the most fundamental thing which is because of which they are all existing? So if we need to really understand, that's why philosophy is given, so that we can understand philosophically what is essence and non-essence, what is the fundamental and not fundamental, and then follow the process. Then one can actually perceive that by direct perception. I don't know if. Yeah. If there are no questions and comments, we'll stop here. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Shri Gaur Nitai ki jai. Thank you all for joining. Hare Krishna.